This is the worst rotator cuff strengthening exercise that you need to stop doing now, the empty can.
Get up and get down, get up and get down.
Hey guys, thanks so much for stopping by the YouTube channel. When it comes to rotator cuff strengthening exercises, there were papers dating back to the 1980s that described two common exercises that address the supraspinatus muscle of your rotator cuff. The full can exercise, that comes up like this, and the empty can exercise, where the arm is tilted over like this, aka emptying a can. Now, let's talk about why the empty can is not a great exercise. Darren, let me have you turn on this side for me. When you do the empty can exercise, your shoulder is internally rotated and then moves through flexion. Now, when the shoulder is internally rotated like this, while there is a high degree of supraspinatus muscle activity of the rotator cuff, there's also a very high degree, or higher degree than the full can, of deltoid activity. Now, when the deltoid is highly active in the presence of a weaker rotator cuff muscle, it leads to greater humeral elevation. So your shoulder is pulled upwards and it has a greater inclination to impinge upon itself. Also, when you internally rotate and then raise your arm, you protract your shoulder blade more, leading to more scapular winging, which also closes off the joint and leads to less favorable joint mechanics, higher incidence of shoulder impingement. So that's why the empty can exercise is a bad exercise, or it is not a favorable exercise when doing rotator cuff strengthening, because there is less favorable joint mechanics. There is increased risk of impingement because of more deltoid activity, more scapular winging, which increases the risk of the joint closing off its space and pinching together. So there's increased risk of impingement. That's why a lot of people who are dealing with shoulder pain when doing the empty can find more pain. It's not a great exercise for those reasons. We have to understand the context of why we're doing exercises. The better option for addressing the supraspinatus rotator cuff muscle is the full can exercise. So by externally rotating the arms and then coming up, even retracting the shoulder blades just a little bit, pulling the shoulders back, allows us to strengthen the rotator cuff muscles with better joint mechanics, more favorable positions of the shoulder blade. There's less impingement risk with the full can exercise. So going back and forth between the empty can, full can, not a great option now that we understand a little bit more about shoulder mechanics. Closes off the joint space, increases risk of impingement. Better option, full can exercise, less risk of impingement, still a great exercise at hitting the supraspinatus of the rotator cuff muscle. Now, how do we progress this exercise? Well, at the start, we can just do a bilateral raise and hold. So he's gonna come up, he's gonna hold at 90 degrees, hold for a couple seconds, and then come back down. For some people, I've had them start with just body weight alone, some of my patients dealing with severe shoulder pain, and then we progress up as needed. You don't need to stay light with this though. You can go heavy. You can definitely do this with 10, 15, even 20 pounds if your shoulders need to. The idea that rotator cuff strengthening exercises have to be done with very light weights or else you start using your deltoids too much is not correct. The rotator cuff muscles are gonna work just fine no matter how heavy the weight is. Technique matters. And as long as we're using good technique and appropriate movement quality, we're gonna be just fine and working the rotator cuff very safely. So the start, progression 1, is just up and back down. The next progression for the open can exercise or the full can exercise, is to come up with both, and you're going to move one arm at a time. So one arm is going to move dynamically while the other one stays static. So we call this static flexion scaption. Something like this, I would have Darren hold his left arm here while his right arm does 10 to 15 or even 20 reps. So this arm is working the shoulder dynamically, while the emphasis on this arm is for static stability. So we challenge the shoulder with a little bit different emphasis based on what part of the movement he's doing. So after 10 to 15 or even 20 reps, I'll have this arm stay still. Now this arm is gonna go down and up during that same amount of reps. So this is an excellent exercise to first off invite both shoulders into the picture and make sure even if he's got shoulder pain on one side, we're working both sides. but also it works the shoulder through both parts of the spectrum, dynamic movement and static shoulder stability. So that is a progression from just the regular full can exercise. The progression from the static one arm at a time open can or full can exercise is to take a band, and we're gonna put this around the wrists. And from here, his cues are to apply tension onto the band and then raise the weight. So what he's doing in this position is creating a little bit more external rotation, emphasis, a little bit more torque on the shoulders before raising up. For anyone who may be dealing with pain with raising a weight right out in front of their shoulder, especially if they're getting pain on the front side of their shoulder, sometimes doing this and creating a little bit more call to action for the lateral shoulder muscles, strength and stability, that external rotation torque, can allow us to have better joint mechanics and move around that pain, so not have that pain anymore. So this is something that I've given a lot of athletes and have seen some very good results with it. Something like this, I would have him do maybe 10, 15 reps. And again, he's going out, raising up, 5 to 10 second hold in this position before coming down and relaxing. So that is the progression for the full can exercise with a band. So that is today's video, guys. Just to let you know a little bit more in-depth understanding of what is going on at the shoulder joint during the empty can and the full can exercise. Too often we see athletes performing the empty can exercise because the practitioner, whether that's an athletic trainer, physical therapist, chiropractor, or doctor, is still using this outdated information that this is a great exercise because of supraspinatus activity is high with it within some studies that we see. But if we understand the complexity of the shoulder, in that often we're also getting a very high degree of deltoid activation that leads to less than favorable joint mechanics, we can be better with other activities. Again, there's a range of whether or not an exercise is good or bad. Sometimes there's a lot of gray. But when you understand the complexity of the exercise, understand the biomechanics and the implications of those biomechanics, it leads you to make better choices. So there's rarely ever a time where I would say an empty can is the right choice. Turn that thumb over, get that external rotation, go through the full can exercise. It's gonna be a much better rotator cuff strength and stability exercise for you. Hope you guys liked today's video. If you have any questions, let me know in the comment section below. And until next time, guys, happy squatting.
They say that energy flows where attention goes, so I pay no mind. Why waste my time with all these negative cats scratching? So caught up in their egos, these people have lost.